The movie starts with an orphan girl named Heidi. After living with her Aunt Diet for 5 years and not being allowed to go outside, Heidi is going to the Swiss Alps to stay with her grandfather. Diet has to work in Frankfurt and can't take Heidi with her, so she ignores warnings from neighbors about her grandfather possibly being unfriendly and dangerous. While they're going up the mountain, Heidi decides to run around in her underdress, enjoying the freedom rather than worrying about being fashionable. When they arrive, her grandfather Alpol gets angry and tells them to leave, saying he doesn't want to take care of Heidi. Diet pretends to leave with Heidi but actually leaves her behind and runs away. Alpol notices and yells at Diet, but Heidi says she doesn't want to stay with her either. Alpol refuses to accept Heidi and locks himself in his house. Heidi decides to sleep in the barn with the goats. The next morning, Alpol gives Heidi some goat milk for breakfast and then takes her to church. The priest examines Heidi and says she's healthy and strong. He believes it's grandfather's responsibility to look after his own family, but since grandfather won't change his mind, the priest says he'll be going to Mayenfeld in 3 days. He wants to take Heidi with him to see if any farmer will need her help. When they get back home, Heidi wonders where she should sleep. Grandfather tells her she can sleep wherever she wants. Since grandfather only has 1 bed and 1 chair, Heidi searches for another place and finds some stairs. She climbs them and discovers an attic full of hay. She decides that will be her bedroom. Heidi tells grandfather that she doesn't want to leave, but he doesn't respond. The next day, Peter the goatherd comes by to collect grandfather's goats. Grandfather asks him to take Heidi with him for the day, maybe even teach her about mountain life. Grandfather gives Heidi some cheese and sausage for her lunch. Heidi is happy to go with Peter and spend the day running with the goats. She likes this much better than being stuck inside the house all day like her aunt used to make her. While Heidi is having a good time, Peter sneaks a bite of her food and blames it on the goats when Heidi notices. Suddenly 2 goats start fighting, and Peter hits them with a stick to stop them. Heidi strongly disagrees with this and after stopping him offers a deal. If he promises not to hit a goat again, she'll share half of her food with him every day. Peter agrees happily but asks her not to tell Alpohi because people in town say he did something bad in the past. When Heidi gets home, she acts strangely around her grandfather and says she'll sleep in the barn, so Alpohi quickly figures out she's heard the rumors. He asks Heidi what she believes more, rumors or what she's seen and heard herself. Heidi chooses her own judgment and hugs Alpohi before going to sleep in the attic. The next day, while Heidi continues to have fun and become closer to Peter, Alpohi does some woodworking to show his granddaughter how much her affection means to him. When Heidi comes home, she's surprised to see an extra chair at the table and hears great news. Alpohi will let her stay forever. Time goes by and Heidi enjoys spending time with Peter every day. She even cuts her hair to feel more comfortable. One day, Peter tells her he won't be around for a few months because he's going to school, but they can meet again in the spring. He suggests she visit him at his house sometime. Heidi wants to go to school too, and their neighbors often remind Alpohi that children need education and friends. However, Alpohi refuses because he believes Heidi won't be able to travel down the mountain during winter. When it starts snowing, things get dull. Alpohi carves a small bird for Heidi to cheer her up, but it doesn't work well. So he makes a sleigh for her instead. This turns out to be a great idea and they both enjoy sledding down the mountain. Later, Alpohi drops Heidi off at Peter's house for a playdate. There she meets Peter's mother and grandmother, but his father has passed away. The grandma can't see and can't eat much because she's missing most of her teeth. They only have old bread to eat. Peter isn't doing well in school and doesn't understand why he needs to learn to read because he herds goats, but his mom won't let him quit. When Alpohi comes to get Heidi, she tells him she feels lucky to have him. Years pass and Heidi lives happily with her grandpa. Diet returns one day, saying she found a nice place for Heidi to go to school and make friends, but Alpohi won't let her leave. He notices how Diet suddenly cares about Heidi. Embarrassed, Diet says she only left Heidi because she had no choice before. She argues with Alpohi but can't change his mind, so she pretends to leave but actually goes deeper into the mountains to find Heidi with the goats. Diet offers again, and when Heidi wants to stay, Diet says Alpohi also wants her to go for her own good. Heidi, upset, lets Diet take her away, and Peter sees everything. When Peter takes the goats back, Alpohi notices Heidi is gone and figures out what happened. He rushes to town, but it's too late. Diet has already left with Heidi, and the neighbors mock Alpohi. In Frankfurt, Heidi is brought to the Seesman mansion, meeting the butler Sebastian, maid Tinette, and governess Rottenmeier. Rottenmeier is unhappy to see Heidi, who seems uncultured, but Diet reminds her this is what they wanted. An unsophisticated child to befriend Clara, who is wheelchair-bound. as Diet demands her part of the deal and leaves. Heidi meets Clara. The girls immediately hit it off, and when Heidi accidentally pushes Clara's chair against the table, Clara lies to protect her and tells Rottenmeier that it was her fault. There's a lot for Heidi to learn in order to be accepted as Clara's companion. They wash her, give her a proper dress and boots, teach her table manners, and forbid her from running around the house or being loud. Heidi must also take classes with Clara and shocks everyone when she confesses she can't read. Rottenmeier wants to get rid of her, but she can't do that until Clara's dad comes back from his trip. So in the meantime, the instructor must teach Heidi how to read while still keeping up with Clara's lessons. Heidi adapts quickly to the rules of the house, but she doesn't change entirely and keeps most of her quirks. She still prefers nature over a house and dreams of the mountains every night, and whenever she can get away with it, she hides bread rolls in her pockets. She and Clara grow very close. This bond inspires Clara to share what happened to her. After her mother's death, Clara became so ill that she lost her ability to walk. Before Heidi came along, she felt lonely and caged in this house because her father's always away on business trips. One afternoon, Heidi refuses to take the daily nap and asks Sebastian to open a window for her. Sadly, she still can't see the mountains, causing Sebastian to explain that in order to see the mountains from here, she would have to get into the very tall city tower. Afterward, Heidi sneaks Clara out of the house and shows her around the city, because Clara is never allowed to go outside. When they find the city tower, Clara waits by the door while Heidi goes as high as possible, only to get disappointed when not even up here it's possible to see the mountains. Clara is a little nervous to be alone, but her mood improves when she finds a person selling kittens and decides to buy them all. Back at the house, Rottenmeier panics when she can't find the girls and sends all the servants out to search for them. It's Sebastian who finds them, and Clara fortunately covers the kitties with the blanket they came with before he can see them. When they return home, Rottenmeier tries to scold them, but ends up sneezing like crazy because of her allergies. The cat suddenly jumped off Clara's lap, scaring Rottenmeier so badly that she climbs on the furniture, making everyone laugh. Later at dinner, as punishment, Heidi isn't allowed to eat. Instead, she must stand in the corner of the room, facing the wall during the whole meal. Rottenmeier promises that next time she'll send her to the cellar with the rats. Heidi won't stand for this, so after dinner, she picks up all the bread rolls she's saved for Peter's grandmother and tries to leave. Rottenmeier stops her, reminding her she's lucky to be receiving fancy clothes and proper education. But what truly makes Heidi feel bad is seeing a disappointed Clara crying and rushing to her room. Since that day, Heidi's dreams get worse and Clara won't leave her room. Tinette explains she's sick and blames Heidi for it. Feeling even worse now, Heidi visits Clara once her doctor says she's feeling better, and reassures her it's not because she hates her that she wants to leave. Clara understands but still doesn't want Heidi to go because she's all she has. With Heidi back at her side, Clara begins leaving her room again and attends classes, but reading isn't coming easily for Heidi. A couple of days later, Clara's father, Mr. Seesman, finally comes home and brings with him grandmother Seesman, who Rottenmeier isn't happy to see. Clara is very excited to reunite with her family, and both Seesmans are glad to finally meet Heidi too. Mr. Seesman in particular is very satisfied with how better Clara looks thanks to his idea of getting her a friend. But Rottenmeier tries to change his mind by explaining Heidi continues to be wild and won't learn to read. However, Grandmother Seesman would rather confirm it with her own eyes than trust Rottenmeier's word. Later in the evening, Grandmother Seesman reads Heidi a bedtime story but doesn't finish it because she wants Heidi to do it. Heidi confesses she can't read because Peter said it was useless. So Grandmother Seesman reminds her that she mustn't trust everything she hears. Since Heidi loves stories and is desperate to know how this one ends, she accepts to put more effort and practice more often. The next day, Grandmother Seesman tells her son that Heidi is wonderful and she can learn to read with the right encouragement. But she can tell the kid isn't happy because this house goes against everything she is. Mr. Seesman refuses to let Heidi go because she makes Clara happy. But Grandmother Seesman points out he wants her to stay because she makes him feel less guilty about leaving Clara alone all the time. Things don't get any easier when strange noises begin echoing around the house every night, and sometimes Sebastian even finds the front door open. All the servants and even Rottenmeier think there may be ghosts in the house, but Mr. Seesman doesn't believe it. With every day that passes, Heidi practices her reading more with the book that Grandmother Seesman left her, and eventually manages to read the whole story to everyone. The teacher takes all the credit, and Mr. Seesman decides this shows Heidi is good enough to stay in the house for good. This makes Clara very happy, but Heidi is upset and cries every night before falling asleep. One evening, after Grandmother Seesman has already gone back to her own house, Mr. Seesman is playing a game of chess with the doctor, when suddenly, they hear the noises the servants had warned them about. The men grab their guns, thinking it may be thieves, but it turns out it's just Heidi sleepwalking. She comes down every night, opens the door, and stares at the distance before returning to her room and lying down at the end of the bed like she would do with a goat. When the doctor checks on her and finds her freezing, Mr. Seesman looks for a blanket in the closet and finds a new pile of bread rolls Heidi has been saving. Then Heidi wakes up, and when the doctor asks her if she's in pain, Heidi explains her chest hurts. Afterward, the doctor has a chat with Mr. Seesman in private to explain Heidi is ill with homesickness, and her nerves are in quite a state, so she should be sent home. At first, Mr. Seesman refuses, but then he spends the night thinking about what happened to his wife. The next morning, when Clara asks about the ghost, her father explains it was Heidi sleepwalking because she's suffering, which is why they'll be sending her home. Clara gets incredibly upset by this news and throws a fit, screaming at Heidi too before she leaves for her bedroom. Heidi is happy to hear she'll go back to Alpohi, but she still worries about Clara and tries to talk to her, yet Clara won't open the door. When the time comes for Heidi to leave, the servants prepare a basket full of bread rolls and other food she can take to the mountains. Heidi hands Mr. Seesman her wooden bird to be given to Clara and makes him promise she'll visit her one day. After Heidi is gone, Rottenmeier points out they'll finally have peace again, but karma soon proves her wrong. There's still a kitten around the house. As Rottenmeier panics, Tinette picks the kitten up and decides to name it Heidi. As soon as she arrives back in town, the first thing Heidi does is take off her boots and reunite with Peter. She stops by his house to say hi and drop off the food. Then she runs up the mountain and, after ditching her fancy dress, she finally reunites with her beloved grandfather. Heidi easily returns to her old routine and spends her days running through the mountains while herding the goats with Peter. But there still are a few changes. She's finally allowed to go to school, so during the winter months, she and Alpol move with the goats to a house in town. Her new teacher is much stricter than Clara's, and sometimes there are physical punishments for misbehaving. Her class laughs at her when she confesses she wants to be a writer when she grows up, but at least she does well in her studies, unlike Peter, who still has trouble reading even when Heidi tries to help him. All the interesting things that happen, Heidi puts in letters for Clara, also saying she misses her a lot, and that she should visit. When the letter reaches Clara, it makes her feel bad because she didn't even say goodbye. So Grandmother Seesman gathers a bunch of servants and together they take Clara up the mountain. While the girls reunite with glee, Grandmother Seesman has a drink with Alpol and asks him if Clara could stay for a few days, offering to pay a fee. Alpol is glad to accept but turns down the money, saying Clara is a guest. Now it's Heidi's turn to show her friend Clara what life is like in the mountains. Clara starts wearing simpler clothes and eating more simply. She even gets to pet the goats, sleep on hay, and see a shooting star. The two girls spend all their time together, which makes Peter very jealous. He doesn't want to join them when Heidi asks because Clara can't go where he goes in her wheelchair, and Heidi wants to stay with her. One morning, Peter sees Clara's wheelchair outside the house before the girls are awake. His jealousy makes him push the wheelchair off a cliff before he runs away with the goats. When the family realizes the wheelchair is missing, Alpol figures out who did it. He carries Clara on his back, and together with Heidi, they follow the usual path for herding goats. Now Clara can finally see the rest of the mountains. Alpol is mad at Peter for something he did, and tells him to watch over the girls for the rest of the day. Clara enjoys the pretty view, the flowers, and a cute butterfly that lands on her foot. She tries to catch the butterfly when it flies away, surprising everyone by standing up suddenly. Walking is still hard for her, so she practices with Heidi and Peter's help over the next few days. Peter changes his mind about Clara after seeing her progress. Later, Grandmother Seesman comes to take Clara back home. Her son is upset at first but changes his mind when he sees Clara walking on her own. They hug and cry, and Grandmother Seesman gives Heidi a notebook and pen to write stories. She tells Heidi to ignore mean comments and do what makes her happy. After saying goodbye to Clara, Heidi goes back to her daily routine with Peter, now carrying her notebook everywhere to write a little every day. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you to the next video.